Document Part 1, 1400 words. Rain tapped against the windshield like impatient fingers, steady and cold. The road stretched ahead, empty in both directions, lined by trees that leaned inward as if whispering secrets to each other. Inside the car, the heater hummed softly, but it couldn't chase away the quiet tension in the air. The man behind the wheel had everything people said they wanted: tailored suits, a name on the side of a downtown building, a bank account with more zeros than most folks see in a lifetime. But right now, none of that mattered. His car had sputtered twice, then died completely, coasting to a stop on the shoulder of a road he didn't even know the name of. He sighed, rubbing his temples. No signal on his phone. Not even a flicker. He'd taken this route on a whim, wanting to escape the noise of the city for a few hours, to think without meetings, emails, or assistants hovering. Now that escape felt more like a trap. Outside, the rain picked up. He grabbed his coat and stepped out, the wet gravel crunching under his polished shoes. He walked toward the faint glow of lights in the distance, maybe a house, maybe a gas station. Anything with a phone or a tow truck number would do. As he got closer, he saw it was a small house older than most, with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. A single bulb above the door cast a yellow circle on the wet ground. He knocked, half expecting silence. Instead, the door cracked open just a few inches, held by a chain. Two eyes, big, dark, and filled with something he couldn't quite place, stared up at him. A little girl no older than 6 or 7 stood there in a faded pink sweater that was too big for her. Her hair was messy, her feet bare despite the chill. Before he could say a word, her lip trembled. Tears welled up fast, spilling down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered, voice shaking. "Don't hurt us." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. He froze. Not because he was offended, but because he'd never been looked at like that before. Like he was danger. Like he was the kind of person who would walk up to a child's home and do something cruel. He took a slow step back, hands open at his sides. "Hey," he said gently. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. My car broke down the road. I just need to use a phone." The girl didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on his, wide with fear. Then from somewhere inside, a soft voice called out, "Who is it, sweetheart?" An older woman appeared behind the girl, her face lined with years but calm in a way that felt steady, like an old tree that's seen every kind of storm. She looked at the man, really looked, and after a moment unhooked the chain. "Come in out of the rain," she said. "You're soaked." He hesitated, suddenly aware of how out of place he must seem. Expensive coat, city haircut, shoes that probably cost more than her monthly bills. But the woman didn't seem to care. She stepped aside and let him in. The inside of the house was small but clean. A worn couch, a coffee table with a stack of library books, a kitchen just visible through an open doorway. The smell of something simple, maybe beans and onions, hung in the air. Warm. Real. "Thank you," he said, water dripping from his sleeves onto the rug. "I didn't mean to show up like this." "You didn't mean to break down in the middle of nowhere either," she replied with a tired smile. "These things happen." The little girl stayed close to her grandmother's side, peeking out from behind her leg. She didn't cry anymore, but her eyes never left him. He introduced himself simply. No titles, no company name, just his first name. The woman nodded and offered him a towel. "We don't get many visitors out here," she said. "Especially not ones dressed like they're heading to a board meeting." He laughed softly. "I was supposed to be back in the city hours ago." She poured him a cup of tea, weak but hot, and sat across from him. The girl finally moved, climbing onto the couch and curling into a ball with a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. They talked, not about money or success or anything flashy, just about the weather, the road, how the nearest mechanic was 20 miles away and wouldn't open till morning. The man found himself relaxing, something he hadn't done in weeks. There was no agenda here. No one wanted anything from him. But then, as the rain drummed on the roof, the little girl suddenly sat up. Her eyes darted toward the window. A car passed on the road, just a local, probably heading home, but her whole body tensed. "Was that them?" she whispered. The grandmother reached over and squeezed her hand. "No, baby. Just someone driving by." The man watched this exchange, confused. "Them?" The woman hesitated, then sighed. "It's been a hard few months," she said carefully. "People knocking on the door late at night. Not the friendly kind," he didn't press, but something in her voice told him this wasn't just about noisy neighbors. There was fear here, deep, quiet fear that lived in the walls and under the floorboards. He thought about his own office, his penthouse view, the security system that cost more than this whole house. He'd always believed safety was something you bought. But sitting here, watching a child flinch at the sound of tires on wet pavement, he realized safety wasn't about locks or alarms. It was about peace. And peace wasn't for sale. The night stretched on. The mechanic wouldn't come until morning, so the woman offered him the couch. He tried to refuse, but she insisted. "You'll catch cold out there," she said, "and we've got room." As he lay under a thin blanket later, listening to the house creak and the rain ease into a soft drizzle, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept circling back to the girl's words. Don't hurt us. Who had hurt her? Or threatened to? And how many others lived like this, quietly afraid, just trying to get through the day? For the first time in years, he felt small. Not because he lacked power or money, but because he'd spent so long looking up, at bigger deals, higher floors, fancier cars, that he'd forgotten to look down. Down at the ground where real life happened, where people worried about keeping the lights on, not turning them into smart homes. Morning came with pale sunlight and birdsong. The little girl was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of oatmeal. She looked at him when he entered the room, but this time, there was no fear, just curiosity. "Did your car get fixed?" she asked. "Not yet," he said, sitting across from her, "but it will be." She nodded, then pushed a small piece of toast toward him. "You can have some." He took it, touched by the gesture. "Thank you." Outside, the world looked different. Cleaner. Sharper. Like he'd been wearing blurry glasses his whole life and only now took them off. He didn't know it yet. But this broken-down car, this rainy detour, this quiet house with its wary child and kind grandmother, this was the beginning of something he never saw coming. Something that would crack open his carefully built world and let real life rush in. And it all started with 3 words from a little girl who just wanted to feel safe. Document Part 2, 1,400 words. Morning light spilled through the kitchen window, soft and golden, turning the steam from the oatmeal bowl into little clouds. The man sat at the table, still in yesterday's clothes, feeling oddly out of place yet strangely at ease. The little girl ate quietly, her eyes occasionally flicking toward him, not with fear this time, but with the kind of cautious curiosity kids get when they're trying to decide if someone's safe. Her grandmother moved around the kitchen like she'd done this 1,000 mornings before, stirring a pot, wiping the counter, humming a tune so low it was almost part of the silence. There was a rhythm to her movements, a quiet dignity in the way she made something warm and nourishing out of so little. "You didn't have to stay," the man said gently. "I could have waited outside for the tow truck." The woman turned, drying her hands on a faded dish towel. "And let you stand in the cold like a stray dog?" "No, thank you." She smiled, but there was tiredness behind it. Deep, bone-level tiredness that sleep couldn't fix. He looked around. The house wasn't fancy. The couch sagged in the middle. The curtains were thin, letting in every ray of sun. But it was clean. Loved even. Photos lined the wall, black and white shots of younger faces, a wedding picture with smiles that looked real, not posed. This wasn't just a house. It was a life. Over breakfast, they talked more. Not about anything big, just small things. How the town used to have a movie theater, a diner that stayed open till midnight, a school bus that came right to the door. Now most of that was gone. The factory shut down 5 years ago, and with it the heartbeat of the place. People moved away. Stores closed. What was left felt like a memory wearing thin. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. The woman paused, stirring her tea. "Every day," she admitted. "But this is home. My daughter grew up here. My grandbaby was born in that back room. You don't just walk away from that," he nodded. He'd moved cities 3 times for better opportunities. Never thought twice. But this was different. This was roots. After breakfast, he offered to help. Not because he had to, but because sitting there, watching her carry water from the sink to the stove made him feel useless. So he washed the dishes, folded the blanket from the couch, fixed a wobbly chair leg with a scrap of wood and a nail he found in a tin by the back door. The little girl watched him the whole time. At one point, she brought him a crayon drawing. A house, a sun, 2 stick figures holding hands. "That's me and Grandma," she said shyly. "It's beautiful," he replied, and meant it. Later, while the grandmother patched a hole in the porch roof, he sat on the steps with the girl. She showed him how to braid blades of grass. Her fingers were small but quick, used to making things out of nothing. He tried to copy her, fumbling with the green strands. She giggled, the first real laugh he'd heard from her. "City hands," she teased. He laughed too. "Guess so." As the day wore on, he noticed things. How the grandmother checked the mailbox 3 times even though it was empty. How she flinched slightly when a truck rumbled past on the road. How she kept the front door locked even in daylight. That evening, as they ate a simple dinner of beans, cornbread, and greens from the garden, the truth finally came out. Not in a dramatic burst, but in quiet pieces, like someone slowly opening a window after keeping it shut for too long. "It started after my daughter got sick," the grandmother said, her voice low. "She needed medicine. Then the hospital bills came. She borrowed money from someone who didn't care about paying back when you can." The man didn't say anything. He just listened. "They came knocking," she continued. "At first just words, then louder, then threats. Said if we didn't pay, they'd take what we had. My daughter, she couldn't take it. One night she just left. Said she'd find work somewhere else, send money back. We haven't heard from her since." The little girl looked down at her plate, pushing a piece of cornbread around with her fork. "I'm sorry," the man said, and it felt like the smallest thing he could say, and the truest. "It's not your fault," the woman replied. "But you see now why my granddaughter cried when you knocked. To her, any stranger at the door means trouble. And most times, she's been right." He thought about all the doors he'd walked through in his life. Marble lobbies, private elevators, VIP entrances. Doors that opened because of who he was, what he owned. But here, a knock on a wooden door could mean fear. Could mean danger. Could mean another night spent listening for footsteps on the porch. That night, instead of leaving when the tow truck finally arrived, he told them he'd stay one more day. Said the mechanic recommended a full check. Better safe than sorry. But the real reason? He couldn't walk away yet. Not after what he'd seen. Not after what he'd heard. The grandmother didn't argue. Maybe she understood. Or maybe she was just too tired to pretend everything was fine. The next morning, he woke early and walked into town. Just a cluster of buildings, really. A post office, a shuttered hardware store, a gas station with peeling signs. He bought groceries, real food, not just beans and rice. Milk, eggs, fruit, bread. Things that wouldn't last long but would taste like care. When he came back, the little girl was sweeping the porch. She smiled when she saw the bags. "You came back." "Of course I did," he said. Inside, the grandmother was mending a shirt. She looked at the groceries, then at him. No words, just a nod that said more than thanks. Over the next few days, something shifted. The girl started talking more. About her favorite book, the cat that sometimes visits, the way rain sounds on the roof. She showed him where the wild strawberries grew behind the house. He taught her how to skip stones in the creek, even though his first 5 tries plopped straight in. He fixed the leaky faucet, replaced the broken porch light, helped stack firewood for the coming winter. Small things. But each one felt like stitching a tear in something precious, and slowly the fear in the house began to lift. Not all at once, but like fog burning off in the sun. The girl stopped jumping at car doors. The grandmother left the front door open during the day. They laughed more, shared stories, ate meals together like they'd known each other for years. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, the man sat on the porch with his tea. The grandmother joined him. "You're not like the others," she said after a while. "How's that?" "You listen," she said simply. "Most people hear, but they don't listen." He looked out at the quiet road, the fields beyond. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, not because of a deal, a meeting, or a plan, but because someone needed kindness and he had some to give. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a pit stop. It was a turning point. And the real change, the hardest, most important part, was just beginning. Document Part 3, 1,400 words. Evenings in that little house had started to feel like something the man hadn't known he was missing. Not excitement, not luxury, but peace. The kind that settles in your bones when you're not pretending to be someone else. He'd sit on the porch after dinner, watching fireflies blink on and off in the tall grass, listening to the girl chatter about her day like he was the most important person in the world to hear it. And maybe for those moments he was. But peace doesn't mean pain disappears. It just means you're finally still enough to feel it. One night after the girl had gone to bed, the grandmother stayed up with him. The air was cool, the kind that smells like damp earth and distant rain. They sat at the kitchen table, mugs of weak tea between them. Outside, an owl called, low and lonely. "She hasn't slept through the night since her mama left," the woman said quietly, staring into her cup. Wakes up crying, calling for her. Sometimes she'll stand by the window for an hour, just waiting. The man didn't know what to say. He'd built empires out of words, negotiations, pitches, speeches that moved markets. But here words felt too heavy, too clumsy, so he just listened. It wasn't just the money, she went on. It was the shame. People around here, they don't understand how fast things can fall apart. One hospital visit, one missed paycheck, and suddenly you're borrowing from folks who don't care if you eat as long as they get paid. My daughter thought she could fix it. She worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, sold her jewelry. But it wasn't enough. Her voice cracked just a little. She cleared her throat and kept going. One night men came. Not loud, not shouting, just standing there in the dark. Said if the money wasn't paid by Friday, they'd take the TV. Then the fridge, then they looked at my granddaughter and said, or maybe something else. She paused, her hands trembling slightly around the mug. My daughter left the next morning before sunrise. Left a note on the pillow. Said she'd send help soon. She hadn't, not a call, not a letter. Just silence. The man felt something tighten in his chest. Not pity, but a deep, sharp ache. He'd spent his life believing that if you worked hard enough, you'd be safe. That success was a shield. But sitting across from this woman who'd worked harder than anyone he'd ever met, and still lost nearly everything, he realized how wrong he'd been. Why didn't you go to the policy? Eh? He asked gently. She gave a sad, knowing smile. Honey, around here the police don't come for folks like us unless someone's already hurt. And even then, sometimes they don't come at all. He looked down. He'd never once doubted that help would come if he needed it. He had lawyers on speed dial, security teams, connections in every city. But this family? They had each other and fear. Later that night, he lay on the couch staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the soft creak of floorboards and the distant hum of crickets. His mind wouldn't rest. He kept seeing the girl's face the first time he knocked, the raw terror in her eyes. Not because of him, but because the world had taught her that strangers bring pain. And then it hit him. He could fix this. Not just the leaky roof or the broken porch step. He could fix the real problem, the debt, the threats, the reason a child couldn't sleep at night. But how? He couldn't just hand over cash, that might make things worse. These weren't kind lenders. They'd see money as weakness, an invitation to demand more. He needed to be smart, quiet, careful. The next morning, he asked the grandmother for the name of the person her daughter owed. She hesitated, then wrote it down on a scrap of paper. Just a first name and a nickname. Be careful, she whispered. People like that. They don't forget faces. He nodded. He wasn't planning to show his face at all. Instead, he drove into the nearest town with a population big enough to have a bank and a post office. He withdrew cash, enough to cover the debt, plus extra for emergencies. Then he found a local lawyer, someone who worked with low-income families. He paid in full, no questions asked, and made one request: handle it quietly. Make it disappear, the lawyer understood. I'll make sure they get a letter saying the debt's been settled by a third party. No names, no trace back to you or them. Good, the man said. And if they come knocking again? Then they're breaking the law, the lawyer replied. And this time I'll be the one calling the police. Back at the house, he didn't say a word about what he'd done. He helped the girl plant marigold seeds in old coffee cans, played checkers with her on the floor, letting her win twice, watched her braid her grandmother's hair with clumsy, loving fingers. But that night, something changed. The girl came into the living room after bedtime, her stuffed rabbit under one arm. She stood by the couch, quiet for a long moment. Are you going to leave tomorrow? She asked. He sat up. I don't know yet. She climbed onto the couch beside him, tucking her feet under her. I hope you stay. Why's that? Because you don't look at me like I'm broken. He felt his throat tighten. You're not broken, he said softly. You're just carrying something heavy. She leaned her head on his shoulder. It's lighter now. He didn't understand what she meant until 2 nights later. A car slowed in front of the house, not just passing by. It stopped. The man was reading by lamplight when he heard it, the low rumble of an engine idling. His body went still. The girl's room was down the hall. The grandmother was asleep in the back. He stood slowly, heart pounding, and peeked through the curtain. 2 men got out. Not in suits, not in uniforms, just jeans, hoodies, the kind of clothes that made you invisible in a crowd. One of them walked toward the porch. The man's first instinct was to grab his phone, call for help. But then he remembered. He'd already taken care of the debt. These men had no reason to be here, unless they didn't believe it was paid. He opened the door before they could knock. The man on the porch froze, surprised to see someone, especially someone who looked like he belonged in a boardroom. Not a broken-down farmhouse. We're looking for... He started. The debt's been settled, the man said calmly, stepping onto the porch. Fully. Legally. You've been notified. The man narrowed his eyes. By who? That's none of your business. But if you come back, you'll be trespassing. And I won't be as polite. There was a tense silence. The second man stayed by the car, watching. Then with a grunt, the first one turned and walked back. The car drove off, tires crunching on the gravel. Inside, the grandmother stood in the hallway, wrapped in a shawl, eyes wide. The girl peeked out from behind her. It's okay, he said. They're gone. But the real moment came later, after everyone had gone back to bed. The man sat alone in the dark living room, listening to the house breathe. And for the first time since he'd arrived, there was no fear in the air. Just quiet, just safety. He hadn't just paid a debt. He'd given them back their nights, their peace, their right to answer the door without trembling. And in doing so, he'd found something he didn't even know he'd lost. His own humanity. Not the polished version he showed the world, but the raw, real kind that shows up when no one's watching, and stays anyway. Document. Part 4. 1,400 words. Morning came soft and slow, like the world was holding its breath. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting stripes across the worn wooden floor. The man woke on the couch, stiff but strangely content. He could hear the quiet clink of dishes from the kitchen. No rushed clatter, no tension in the sound. Just the peaceful rhythm of a normal morning. When he walked in, the little girl was already at the table, coloring in a book with bright, careful strokes. She looked up and smiled. Not the cautious half-smile from before, but a real one, wide and easy. You stayed, she said, like it was the best news she'd heard all week. I did, he replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot the grandmother had left warming on the stove. The woman herself was outside, hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 trees. Sheets flapped in the breeze like white flags of surrender, but not to hardship, to hope. He watched her for a moment, the way she smoothed each piece before pinning it like she was tucking care into every fold. Over the next few days, something new took root in that house. Not just safety, but joy. Small, everyday joy. The kind that doesn't need fanfare, just presence. He started spending his mornings helping in the garden. He'd never grown anything in his life beyond a potted plant that died in 3 weeks. But here he learned how to space tomato seeds, how to tell when beans were ready to pick, how to chase off rabbits without hurting them. The girl taught him, her small hands guiding his, dirt under her nails, sun freckles blooming on her nose. In the afternoons, they'd sit on the porch steps and play cards. She'd laugh when he pretended to be shocked by her winning hand, even though he let her win on purpose. You're getting too good, he'd say, and she'd puff out her chest like a proud little bird. At night, they'd read together, old storybooks with torn pages and dog-eared corners. She'd curl into the couch beside him, head resting on his arm, eyes heavy but fighting sleep just to hear one more page. He'd never read aloud to anyone before, never realized how powerful it felt to give someone your voice, your time, your full attention. Meanwhile, the grandmother began to stand a little taller. She started humming again while she cooked. Left the front door open during the day without glancing over her shoulder every few minutes. One afternoon, she even invited a neighbor over for tea, a woman with kind eyes and a basket of fresh eggs. They sat at the kitchen table talking about nothing and everything. The weather, a church fundraiser, a recipe for peach cobbler. Normal things. Human things. The man watched from the porch sipping lemonade, feeling like he was witnessing something sacred, not because it was grand, but because it was real. This was life as it should be, messy, simple, shared. He didn't tell them what he'd done about the debt. Not because he wanted credit, but because it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the girl slept through the night now. That she ran to the door when she heard a car, not away from it. That she asked him questions about the stars, about cities, about whether fish get lonely in the ocean. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in oranges and purples, she turned to him and said, "Do you have a family?" He hesitated. "Not really," he admitted. "I have people who work for me. Friends who call when they need something, but no one who waits up for me." She thought about that for a moment, then reached over and took his hand. "We'll wait up for you," his eyes stung. He blinked fast and squeezed her hand back. "That means more than you know." As the days passed, he found himself thinking less about his office, his meetings, his endless list of things to do. Instead, he thought about how the beans were coming along, whether the marigolds would bloom before frost, what story they'd read next. He wasn't running from his old life. He was just finally seeing what he'd been missing. One morning he drove into town again, not for groceries this time, but for tools. A new hammer, nails, wood sealant, paint. He spent the day fixing the back fence that had been sagging for years. The girl helped, mostly by handing him the wrong tool and then giggling when he pretended to be confused. Later he called someone, a contact from his old world, but one he trusted. Not to make a deal, but to ask a favor. "I need help connecting with a nonprofit," he said. "One that supports families in rural communities. Housing, food, legal aid, the real stuff." The voice on the other end was surprised but willing. "You thinking of donating?" "I'm thinking of doing more than that," he said. "I want to understand how to help in a way that lasts." He didn't just write a check and walk away. He asked questions, learned how local programs worked or didn't, found out which ones actually listened to the people they served. And quietly, without fanfare, he started setting things in motion. Funding for emergency housing grants, support for community legal clinics, even a small fund to help families pay medical bills before they spiraled into debt. But none of that mattered as much as what was happening right here, in this house. One rainy afternoon, the girl brought him a notebook. "I wrote a story," she said shyly. He opened it. In wobbly handwriting, she'd written about a traveler who got lost, found a home he didn't know he needed, and stayed just long enough to fix the roof, and his own heart. He read it twice, then looked at her, eyes bright. "This is the best story I've ever read." She beamed. That night, as he lay on the couch listening to the rain tap on the roof like a lullaby, he realized something. He wasn't the hero of this story. He never was. The real heroes were the ones who kept going when everything was against them. The grandmother who held her family together with love and grit. The little girl who still found joy even after fear had lived in her house. He was just someone who showed up. And sometimes that's enough, but showing up changed him. Not in a dramatic lightning strike kind of way. More like water shaping stone, slow, steady, deep. He used to measure success in numbers, in headlines, in how high he could climb. Now he measured it in quiet moments. A shared meal, a child's laugh, a front door left open on a summer evening. He didn't know how much longer he'd stay. But he knew this. When he finally left, he wouldn't be the same man who broke down on that rainy road. And maybe, just maybe, that was the whole point. Document. Part 5. 1,400 words. Winter came quietly that year, wrapping the countryside in a soft white blanket. The trees stood bare but dignified, their branches tracing delicate patterns against pale gray skies. Smoke curled from the chimney of the little house, and inside the air smelled of cinnamon, wood smoke, and something warm baking in the oven. The man hadn't left, not because he was stuck, but because he'd found something worth staying for. And when he finally did go back to the city, it wasn't to return to the life he'd known. It was to change it. Months had passed since his car broke down on that lonely road. In that time, he'd helped patch the roof before the first snow, built a proper shelf for the girl's growing collection of books, and taught the grandmother how to use a tablet so she could video call distant relatives. But more than that, he'd learned how to be still, how to listen, how to care without expecting anything back. One morning, he packed his things, not much, just a small bag. The girl stood in the doorway, arms crossed, trying hard not to cry. "You're really going?" she asked. He knelt so they were eye to eye. For a little while. But I'll be back. How do I know? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Because I wrote you a promise. She opened it. Inside was a simple note. I'll come back before the first snow melts. Beneath it, a bus ticket, round trip, from the nearest town to the city with her name on it. So you can visit me too, he said. Her eyes widened. Really? Really. The grandmother watched from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She didn't say much, she never did, but the look in her eyes said everything. Gratitude, trust in something that felt like family. He left in a modest car this time, not the sleek machine that had stranded him months before. No chauffeur, no assistant, no entourage. Just him, a thermos of coffee, and a heart full of something he couldn't quite name. Back in the city, things felt different. The buildings were taller, the streets louder, the people faster, but none of it pulled at him the way it used to. He walked into his office, greeted his team, and then called a meeting. Not about profits or projections. About purpose. I've been gone a while, he told them, and I've seen something I can't unsee. There are people out there, good, hard-working people, who are one missed paycheck away from losing everything. And we have the power to help. At first there was silence, then questions, then cautious support. He didn't demand they follow him, he invited them. And slowly the company began to shift. Not overnight, but steadily. They partnered with rural aid organizations, created a fund to cover emergency medical bills for low-income families, launched a program that matched employee donations to community shelters. He didn't do it for headlines. He didn't even tell anyone about the little house or the girl who once begged him not to hurt them. This wasn't about redemption. It was about responsibility. And then, true to his word, he came back. Not in spring, but early. Just as the last patches of snow were shrinking into puddles. He pulled up in that same modest car, trunk full of school supplies, winter coats, and a brand new bike with training wheels. The girl ran out before he'd even turned off the engine. She threw her arms around him like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. You came back, she shouted, laughing. I told you I would. Inside, the house felt even warmer than he remembered. The grandmother had painted the kitchen walls a soft yellow. New curtains fluttered in the breeze. On the table sat a framed photo, the three of them taken on his last day before leaving, smiling like they belonged together. Over the next few days, he settled back into the rhythm of the place. Mornings in the garden, afternoons reading on the porch, evenings filled with stories and the smell of soup simmering on the stove. But this time he wasn't just a visitor. He was part of it. He also brought news. The nonprofit he'd connected with months ago had opened a small office in the nearest town. They offered free legal help, job training, even counseling for families dealing with loss or stress. And they'd hired the grandmother part-time to help with outreach, someone who knew the community, who people trusted. She's perfect for it, he told the girl one evening as they sat under the stars. She's been helping people her whole life. Now she gets to do it officially. The girl leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you think Mama will come back someday? He didn't lie. I don't know. But I do know this, you're loved. By her, by your grandma, and by me. And that's not going anywhere. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, You're not like other grown-ups. How's that? You stay, he smiled. Some things are worth staying for. As the weeks turned into months, his visits became regular. Sometimes he'd stay a few days. Sometimes just overnight. But he always came back. And each time he brought a little more hope, not just in boxes and bags, but in the way he looked at them, listened to them, believed in them. Years later, long after the girl had grown tall enough to reach the top shelf, after the grandmother's hair had turned fully silver, people in town would talk about the man who showed up one rainy night and never really left. They'd say he changed things. Not with grand speeches or big promises, but with quiet acts of care that added up to something lasting. And the man? He'd say he was the one who got changed, because that broken-down car, that fearful whisper, that humble kitchen table. They didn't just save a family from fear. They saved him from emptiness. He'd spent his life climbing, always chasing more. But it was in stopping, in kneeling down to meet a child's eyes, in sitting at a worn table with a woman who had nothing but still offered him tea, that he finally found what he'd been missing all along. Not success. Not wealth, belonging. And sometimes all it takes is one knock on the wrong door to find the right home.